Plus, are you feeling all worked up, beaten down, and stressed out about your job? I'll dive into mental health in the workplace with Chirag Agarwal, co-founder and chief growth officer at Talk Your Heart Out. Yeah, thanks very much for that, Yuim. You're completely right. The theme for our Leadership Summit this year is mental health in the workplace. I'll be moderating a session at 4 p.m. That's entitled A New Era for Mental Health and the Future of Work. But that's in the future and about the future. In the here and now, I'm joined by Chirag Agarwal. He's the co-founder and chief growth officer of Talk Your Heart Out. Chirag, great to chat with you this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us more about Talk Your Heart Out. I understand that you sort of, as a young startup that sort of got into this space at the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, so we started about 2.5 years ago with the real goal of making access to therapy or access to quality therapy easier. It happened so that the pandemic hit and we saw more and more clients wanting to seek therapy online and see a psychologist or a counselor to improve their mental health and well-being.
Okay, so we'll talk about the employees' point of view in a second. But if we start with the employers, what have you noticed over the last 2 years that you guys have been up and running? Has there been a steady demand for this kind of service that you provide?
Yep, definitely. So we also provide services to organizations who'd like to subsidize counseling sessions for their employees. And the really interesting statistic that we have kind of noticed in the last 2.5 years is that about 90% of the organizations that are looking to provide mental health services or support for their employees are doing so for the first time. So there's a real increase in awareness about the importance of providing support for your employees, given they're working 10 to 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, sometimes on the weekend. And employers are starting to feel a real obligation to help support the mental health and well-being of their employees.
And would you say that this trend was actually started before the pandemic? I mean, when you were planning this startup to launch, you can't have known that the pandemic was going to happen. So was this a trend that was already happening and then the pandemic has sort of just accelerated that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a growing awareness that, mental health services or therapy services are not really just for those who are having like serious mental health conditions or mental health illnesses, but it's really for everyone because mental health is really on a continuum and people facing stress, anxiety, depression, having relationship issues, having issues, with prolonged grief, and all of us face such issues at some point in our lives. So there was a growing recognition that more and more people can benefit from therapy. So the goal was how do we make it more accessible for them?
And there seems to be a shift in mindset as well from thinking not just purely about physical health, but also thinking about mental health in those same terms, even though it's not necessarily something that you can see visibly.
Absolutely. The World Health Organization says something to the effect that there's no health without mental health, because mental health is as important as physical health. But the stigma that surrounds mental health is stronger because it's unseen. It's so hard to quantify what you're feeling, as opposed to when you get injured, you can't walk, you sprain your ankle.
It's visible. Someone
it's visible.
Can see it.
Exactly. So definitely, but there's more and more recognition, and I think that's why events like this summit today are so beneficial because it increases the vocabulary of ordinary folks to understand how to talk about mental health. My wife always asks me, how do you feel? And I'll respond with three kind of statements. It's either I'm tired, I'm sleepy, or I'm hungry. And those are physical sensations. They're not feelings and emotions. So there's a need to really expand people's vocabulary so that they can understand how they're feeling and then take care of their mental health better.
Yeah, and it's very encouraging to hear that employers are taking the first step. You mentioned the number of them that are doing it for the first time. When it comes to employees, us working people as well, we've seen our sort of lives upended by the pandemic. It's gone from, working from home feels a bit like living at work at times. So you must have seen like a lot of demand as well for employees reaching out for help.
Yep. So definitely there's a steady increase of individuals seeking help, from everything from your stress, anxiety, depression, but also, couples counseling for having marital issues or not being able to communicate well with their children, going through periods of grief or adjustment, having to work overseas or come back from overseas. So there's a whole range of issues that people seek mental health support for. And what we are seeing is actually another interesting statistic that we've kind of like tracked is 80% of the clients on Talk Your Heart Out are seeking therapy for the very first time. So that again shows you that there's really an increasing awareness of how therapy can help a broad range of people in society and for a range of issues.
Yeah, and also points to acceptance.
Yes.
That it's okay to seek help for mental health issues.
Yep.
And these issues, I mean, it's a whole spectrum when you talk about mental health.
Absolutely.
It could be sort of minor anxiety on one end to, much more severe, sort of traumatic instance on the other. There's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to mental health, though, is there?
Yep, exactly, which is why we believe that sometimes talking to a professional is the way to go. And even in that, finding the right fit is important. You can almost say, like, if you go to any doctor or any dentist, you are likely to get the same medication, the same treatment. But when it comes to therapy, because it's such an intimate, personal endeavor in which you are quite vulnerable and have to really trust, build a relationship of trust with the therapist, that sometimes finding the right therapist is not so easy.
Yes.
Because it's not one size fits all. So you have to see, who is it that can benefit you best? Can you trust this person? Can this person relate to you? And so another thing I've heard, which I think is quite accurate, is that finding the right therapist is sometimes like dating. You might not get it right the first time. You might get lucky, but you might not get it right the first time. But it's important to keep looking to find someone you can really trust, and then that therapeutic process can really benefit you in the long run.
Okay, we've just got time for one last quick question. If someone was watching this and they wanted some advice on, or they were feeling like a bit unsettled and that they were thinking their mental health has been suffering, what should they be doing?
Yep. So a great tip my therapist gave me was that the importance to disconnect with what's bringing you that anxiety or depression or sense of hopelessness. And I think one great way to do that is to disconnect from from the internet, from social media, news, your email. And so one thing I like to do personally is to leave my phone at home when I go for an evening walk with my wife every evening. So that gives me 20, 30 minutes of completely being disconnected. I also become a better listener, which is a bonus, when I walk with my wife. So I think being able to disconnect for a certain time in a day is a great way to kind of maintain your mental health.
Yeah, little steps perhaps can go a long way in looking after all our mental health. Thank you so much for speaking with
me
this afternoon. We were speaking with Chirag Agarwal. He's the co-founder and chief growth officer of Talk Your Heart Out. Back to you in studio.